most of my training officers at one point or another would say, hey, be careful with guys on motorcycles. And what they meant was, if a guy on a motorcycle wants to get away from you, he will. And there's nothing you can do about it in a car. There just isn't. And I didn't understand that until the first time I tried to pull over a motorcyclist and he disappeared. Like a magic trick. And I was like, oh, my whole thing about law enforcement, particularly when I'm talking to people that like cops, or, you know, my brother's a cop, my aunt's a cop, my best friend's a cop, my dad was a cop. Like, they're not all as bad as you're saying. I know that. I worked with great cops. There was times I was a good cop. Like, there were times where I chose grace over cruelty to people, and that's times I'm proud of myself. There was a lot of times I didn't make that choice. There was a lot of times I chose cruelty over grace. I don't love that there's a system that relies on my attitude waking up on a given Thursday for whether or not you are going to experience state violence, right? Oh man, wouldn't that be a great story for me if I had this big epiphany and I took a big stand and I did the Norman Rockwell meme of the guy standing up at the meeting, standing in the street. Man,
and everyone's looking at you. Yeah.
Man, wouldn't that be really impressive? Because that's not my story, unfortunately. And the time that I left Christianity, the things that took me out of it, were times that people were no longer able to answer my questions. And the things that brought me into progressivism, and the things that brought me into leftism, and the things that brought me into abolitionism, where people had good answers.
I just want to briefly mention that I have a Squid Tips sticker pack I just released with artists from the Squid Tips Discord community. For $15, you get the whole thing, including my little fursona right here, my little Yeen fursona. Isn't that sick? Yeah, these are all created by people inside my community. So yeah, check it out if that's something that interests you, if you're into furries and motorcycles and awesome community created content. Hey, welcome. In today's video, I'm going to interview Phil, ThatDangDad. You might recognize his content. I've invited him to be involved in some of my videos in the past on policing because he is an ex-cop for almost a decade. And so he has a lot of internal information about what it's like being a cop. He also has a very different background from me, a religious background, a more conservative background. And I've learned a lot hearing him talk about what that background filled him with and then how he kind of deprogrammed himself from that. Because, and I wanted to talk to him because I think it's important to influence people. I want to be selling. We're coming up on 2024. I think this is going to be a really big year. And I think it's going to be a year that a lot of people, especially conservative people, are kind of shaken. As far, like, I am expecting there to be kind of trouble. And I would love to give them a soft landing in places like my community or in communities that are kind of closer to the edge of like, they're for everybody. So Phil, is there anything you'd like to add about your intro of you being a cop, being a YouTuber? I know you started talking mostly about just like dad stuff, but then you kind of moved into other things.
I've always been interested in like public communication, and typically writing was kind of how I got my start. But I grew up in a very conservative Christian church. The Church of Christ is the denomination that we were called. Very like Southern, very conservative, but
was this in Kentucky?
No, this was in Southern California. So I was born in Orange County, California.
Oh yeah, there was a I don't know if you listen to Beyond the Bastards or whatever, but they do there was a big
I'm familiar with them.
Okay, I learned very recently that how Orange County and that area was a very conservative area in California and how it got that way. Very interesting. Anyway, keep going. Sorry.
So anyway, yeah. So I was born in Southern California. I was born in Orange County. Grew up in the Church of Christ, super conservative. But I always looked up to people like C.S. Lewis and G.K. Chesterton, who were writers, and they wrote books, but they wrote essays. I love essays. My favorite form of writing is like a good 5 to 10 page essay. Like that's That's my favorite. And so that's why you notice none of my content is more than like 30 minutes. Like I just want to, I have an idea. I want to get in, get out, and that's kind of my thing. But anyway, so I was always like trying to write essays growing up in the church. I was always trying to write, I always want to be the next GK Chesterton. And, I want to have blogs. I want to do all this and that. And then, um, I got into law enforcement, and through law enforcement, that's I started working weekends, and that's how I got away from the church. Was I was working times that I would usually have been going to church, and so that started kind of my secularization. And then after I left law enforcement, I got into marketing and digital marketing and content creation for business purposes. And it was always kind of in the back of my head. I was like, I wonder if I could be any good at this, not for business purposes. Like, could I apply these things I'm learning professionally to do as a hobby? And when my daughter was born in 2019, I was staying up late. I was watching a lot of Philosophy Tube, and I was like, man, Philosophy Tube's great. I want to do that. I want to be the next Philosophy Tube. So first I admired G.K. Chesterton, then I admired Abby Thorne.
Who's G.K. Chesterton? I know who Lewis Carroll is. That's who wrote the Chronicles of Narnia, right? Like,
yeah, C.S. Lewis wrote Chronicles of Narnia. He wrote, he was friends with J.R. Tolkien, and they were friends with a guy named G.K. Chesterton, who was he's Catholic, but he was kind of like a renegade Catholic thinker. A weird dude. Like, just if you ever read any GK, he's a weird dude. But that's what I liked about him, is that he was kind of cheeky and kind of irreverent, and he was very religious, but he was also audacious and fearless, and he would talk about things in a weird way that I found really attractive. I've always been interested in people who think about things from different angles or just have like weird ideas about things. And that was G.K. Chesterton, and he was basically, I think he would have been like a Christian socialist, nowadays. But it's hard to say how he would have, because so many. We're getting way off topic here, but so many people that I followed when I was a Christian conservative 20 years ago, I would have told you, oh, these are normal people. They are not conspiracy theorists. They're not flat earthers.
they're not extreme. These aren't
Yeah.
extreme religious people. Yeah.
Yeah, they're not absurd. Yeah, okay, they believe in a creator deity. Okay, great. So did everybody, for the last 10,000 years of human history or whatever. Like, so they have some unusual ideas about the creation of the world. So what? Who cares? They're basically decent people. And then over the last 20, particularly over the last 10 years, I've watched a lot of these people go absolutely bananas in the wrong direction. And so I don't know what would have happened to G.K. Chesterton. Maybe he would have been an anti-vaxxer, Dennis Prager type, but
Well, I
back
want to
in the
talk
day.
later on how conservative people think in order to, because I think there are reasons that you can find why people fly off into the stratosphere. Like, you either come down because you find like truth, because you seek truth, because you have so much cognitive dissonance, and you're just like, no, things have to start making sense, or you follow the rabbit hole into wherever that to maintain the cognitive dissonance, wherever that takes you.
Yeah.
In the last decade, you said that you were a California cop. So this is a motorcycle channel. I don't know if you know this, Phil. This is a motorcycle channel. That's really exclusively what we talk about here. So I want to know, in California, in like the home of motorcycles for the United States, like, what was where lane splitting and sharing is legal? Like, what was your perspective as in the cop brain version? Like, were motorcycle riders any different to you? Did you think of them like rebels, or like, were they more likely to feel dangerous to you, or how did you think of that?
So of course I remember that you're a motorcycle channel, because you are the second person to hit me up for a guest spot right after my channel blew up. You were the second person to reach out and say, hey, you want to come on and talk on my channel? And I was like, I didn't know what to think of you at first, because you were this, attractive, like conventionally attractive, very Ryan Gosling type handsome motorcycle guy. And I was like, am I going to get along with this guy? I don't. It turned, obviously we do get along, and
I think you were the person that told me that having a queer, you were the first person that having the flag was like an indicator that I was
Yes.
safe. And I remember thinking that was like a really not like, you changed how I thought. Like like you saying that was like the beginning of being like, oh, this is really important that I do this all the time, everywhere, as much as possible for that reason.
Yeah. When I was kind of vetting your channel to make sure that I wanted to go on it, make sure you weren't a chud or something like that. I saw a trans flag in your background. I was like, oh, okay, phew, okay. Whatever's going on with the motorcycle, because I didn't know you. I was like, whatever's going on motorcycle, at least it's cool.
So what did you think about motorcycle riders? Like, what did that look like in California as in the cop brain version of you?
So when I was coming up, I never personally was interested in motorcycles. I didn't know anybody that rode them. That wasn't kind of part of my upbringing or whatever. So when I was coming up in law enforcement, I didn't have any thought of them one way or the other. And then when I was in training, most of my training officers at one point or another would say, hey, be careful with guys on motorcycles. and what they meant was, if a guy on a motorcycle wants to get away from you, he will. And there's nothing you can do about it in a car. There just isn't. And I didn't understand that until the first time I tried to pull over a motorcyclist and he disappeared. Like magic trick. And I was like, oh, fuck. And I'm sitting in a Ford Crown Victoria, and I was just like, well, there's not like...
It is very much an optional. That's like where I'm at after my cop interaction. Like, I've gotten less, like I think about cops way less. I don't even look on the side of the road anymore. I'm just like, well, if I ride faster, they're never going to catch me. And now that I lane split at like full speed effectively, like it is a completely optional experience whether I allow a cop to catch me or not.
That's what my training officer said. They said, if you pull over a guy on a motorcycle, it's because he let you.
Like, because he was scared. He didn't know that. He was,
but yeah, and so I knew cops that I worked with that hated motorcyclists because of that, because of this sense that we could not control you if we needed to, right? Like, that's very threatening for a police officer. We don't like that. We only feel happy when we have the state monopoly on violence and total control of where you are spatially, basically. But the city that I worked in was 2.4 square miles was the area that I worked. And it was in Southeast Los Angeles. And so it was dense and urban, but it was tiny. And it was poor. And so we didn't have a ton of motorcyclists in the city. That just, it was working class. It was first and second generation Hispanic immigrant, part of the major narcotics corridor coming up through from Mexico through the United States. And so the people who were on motorcycles were typically just passing through my town, and at 2.4 square miles, they were passing through instantly.
Did you so even with like chips, for example, and like, did you ever want to be like, it sounds like you didn't want to be a motorcycle cop even with that, but like, were motorcycle cops cool people to like, were they cooler on average than the normal cops, or were they just as shitty? Or
fuck no, they were the worst.
Oh,
so, and I can explain, there's a reason for that. When you see a cop, particularly in California, I can only speak to California policing with confidence, but when you see a cop on a motorcycle, that is a traffic cop. So that is a cop that said, hey, the only thing I want to do is write tickets. So right there, you've got a boring asshole that only wants to write tickets. Like this, the guys that wanted to write tickets were those boring dudes. Like, they had no fucking aspirations or anything. But yeah, you had to go through a special school, and you had to love writing tickets. So the guys that went to motorcycles were the guys that loved pulling people over and never gave warning. like as a patrol cop, I would pull people over all the time, and I just say, hey, for the most part, I didn't like writing tickets. So I'd be like, hey, pulled you over for this. Chill out. Be careful. Go on your way. If you get pulled over by a motorcycle cop, you're fucked. Like you're getting a ticket. It is
I'm
that's set in
definitely
stone.
recalling I have never not gotten a ticket from a motorcycle cop ever. Like, yeah. What you said that you said that your father was a cop. Is that kind of what, in addition to your kind of just general conservative upbringing, is that what brought you to become a cop, or do you think there's more to it than that?
Yeah, he his lifelong dream since he had been a kid was to be a cop, and life just didn't break that way for him at first, and he got into computers back in the 80s when that was kind of new, and he ended up as a software developer and then as a manager and a VP. And so he had this whole corporate life while I was growing up. And so that's just what I thought men did, was they went to the office and they put on a tie and they sat in a cubicle and they did things on computers, I guess, question mark. And that was what men did to go make money. And then when he was 44, he had a buddy at his church who was a cop who brought him on some ride-alongs, and it really got my dad all fired up to be a cop again. And he was like, but I'm 44, I'm too old. And his buddy said, hey, you can go through the police academy and then become a reserve, and then you can be a cop like part-time on the weekends for fun. Kind of, live your dream, have your little thrills or whatever.
Be a cop for fun. Ooh.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, of
Yeah, I know.
course.
Yeah. And so he went through the police academy, and then he ended up getting offered a job at a police department full time as a full time cop. And so he quit. He was running a small software company at the time. So he gave up his whole corporate, let's just say, very comfortable life. Um, uh, we didn't miss a lot of meals when I was growing up. Um, he gave all that up to become a cop at 44. He went through the police academy, got hired, and I saw how much fun he was having. And he lost all this weight. Like my dad was always kind of just a doughy white guy, a doughy corporate white guy. Well, he went to the police academy. He lost all his weight. He got all fit. He started swearing. My dad was super conservative religious, never swore. He started saying the F word, and we're like, whoa, dad said the F word, and he was coming home with like
It's becoming
tasers.
street. He was
Yeah,
like, the streets were impacting him,
yeah, and he came home with a taser, and he was coming home with guns, and he was coming home with all these stories about getting into fights. Like my dad was just such a gentle guy. Like he was just that was just not my dad, and he was coming home with all these stories of adventure. And I was like, well, I don't want to wait till I'm in my mid-40s to have adventures. I want to have adventures now. And so I was actually going to college on a full ride scholarship, and I dropped out to join the police academy.
Wow.
And
What was your full ride in?
business
Oh, okay.
business administration. Um, yeah, so I gave up, and I know now that was stupid, but I gave up a full ride college scholarship to put myself through the police academy because I was in my early 20s, and I was having a hard time getting hired because I was young and I didn't have any life experience. I was a Orange County white boy who had zero experience of the world. And so I had to pay my own way through the police academy, and then partway through I got a job offer, and I got hired. But yeah, him going through, particularly, so to answer your question, was my father an influence? Yeah, but particularly because he went through when he did, as a middle-aged man, as a corporate drone, got to go out and be out on the streets and be dangerous and be exciting. And I was like, I want to be exciting and dangerous. And I think more than anything, I've always wanted to be interesting. That's why I have a YouTube channel, because
Don't we all?
I
Don't we all want to be?
I desperately want to be interesting. I want people to be interested in the things I have to say. And when you're a cop, as evidenced by you having me on your channel multiple times, people love cop stories. They want to hear what you have to say, and that was very intoxicating for me. And so it just spiraled
You
on from
mentioned the
there.
cop poetry. You have a video where you talk about where you were a cop doing poetry, which is crazy. That's a crazy story. And that
Yeah.
you would be bringing stories from the people around you to there to kind of describe and how interested people are in that. I can say that honestly, I find cops like the idea of listening to a cop tell me stories from their perspective kind of makes me want to vomit because I just know how much it's like. I know how it's probably a very one-sided situation. There's not going to be a lot of empathy there usually. And you yourself talked about like basically, and I'm wondering if maybe it's because you'd mentioned that you felt like you didn't feel super worldly or you didn't feel super experienced. And so the cop story, which is that you get boiled into messages that stoke fear for your personal safety. And then they put you in a community where you don't really have connection on purpose so that you're not unintentionally empathizing with people or that you're not having awkward interactions where you have to like live and exist with these people in the normal context of school and work and the grocery store, which then and then you make people you remove accountability from them for bad actions, and then you give them a story to justify it, which is this like back the blue, we are the line against the chaos. um so yeah, I can imagine you like jumping in, watching, seeing your father like almost have, I mean, I assume it sounds like a midlife crisis type of situation, like doing something where it was like, I'm not happy. I'm making a lot of money. I'm taking care of my family. I'm being a good provider and all these things, but I'm not personally experiencing happiness. Like I want adventure and excitement, and like how he did the reverse of what most cops do, which is most cops just get fat, from sitting and from doing nothing. He was the reverse. He's like, no, I'm going to get fit and do this thing. And I can imagine a young Phil looking at that and being like, that's so cool. And like not knowing any better. And then like that kind of like guiding your life. But like, is that accurate? Does that kind of all sound, these are all things I think you've said. Does that kind of sound like maybe what happened with you and what you saw and like took you down that road?
Yeah. It's so I'm really sympathetic to this project that you're doing, talking about, how do people end up right wing jerks? How do people end up in these communities that are violent and toxic and frankly miserable? Like when you look at the kinds of people that are, anti-immigrant, anti-trans, anti pick your whatever, they're all miserable, right? Like they've all alienated their family, they're all divorced, they don't see their kids, and so being on the left, when all of your friends believe the same way as you, it's really hard to understand, like, how do people get involved in these things, or how do people think like this? It seems miserable, it seems counterproductive, it seems antisocial. How do people end up like that? And so that's part of why I don't mind talking about these things in my background that are, not things I'm proud of, not things that make me, think highly of myself, but like,
It's understandable though.
yeah.
Like
And when you look at somebody like me, who is just a very average white middle class dude, like a very, just a guy, just some guy, like I am the epitome of some guy. But I think it's important for particularly radical minded folks to understand, me being just some mediocre guy for a long time, the world worked out for me very well. The, the world was exceedingly kind to me,
you didn't
particularly.
get any negative reinforcement. You didn't get a lot of negative
No.
reinforcement saying this is bad. What you're doing is bad. Like, no, you had a decent life. It sounds like,
Yeah.
right? Like, and your dad was like you said, he was a good guy who did good. He did charitable things as you
Yeah.
described. Like,
My dad was a pastor before he was, he was a pastor when he had me, and then got into, and my family is supposed to be the American dream. When you hear people talk about the American dream, that is my family. great grandfather on my dad's side was a Oklahoma farmer in the Dust Bowl who had nothing. Um, grew up on a farm, dirt poor. Uh, had siblings that were stillborn, buried in the yard, like
Jesus.
straight up okie shit. Like that was my great grandfather. He had my grandfather, who came to California to try to make his fortune. Got a union gig at the um, at the gas company digging ditches. So my grandfather was a ditch digger for the gas company. Had my dad. My dad went into college, dropped out, had a kid, got into computers, and then became a VP of IT. Went back and got his degree later, but became a VP of IT. 2 generations ago, he came from dirt farmers, and now he's a VP of IT. And I'm the product of this lineage of guys that have just walked ass backwards into success in life, and they worked hard. Like, you could say a lot of things about my grandpa. He was a complicated man, but the dude worked his ass off to feed his family. He dug ditches. I don't know if you've ever dug a ditch. It's hard work. It sucks shit to dig holes. And he
Sounds
did it.
unfun, especially
It's
without an iPod to like listen to podcasts or something. Are
Yeah.
you joking? Just with your thoughts?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he was just out in the middle of nowhere in Central California digging ditches for the gas company. Um, he worked really hard, saved his money, bought property, uh, you know, bought property when it was cheap, passed it on to his kids. That property in California. So my ditch digging grandpa, when he died, was probably worth $500,000 just because he had bought property at random lucky spots, because that's what you were supposed to do when you were, you know, a guy in the 70s. You bought property if you had a little extra cash. But I mean, my grandpa was no mogul. We didn't come from money, but he did the American dream thing. You work hard, you save your money, you save your pennies, you buy property. That property gains in value, you pass it on to your kids, yada yada. So, and I say all that to say, not to brag or whatever, but like, I say all that to say, I come from a line of people for whom the system did what it was supposed to do on the box, what it said it did on the box. The system worked exactly right for me. Everything that it was supposed to do, it did. And so when you think about law enforcement, when you think about the military, to bring it back to your topic, why would somebody join it? Why would somebody become a cop? Why would somebody become a Marine? Why would somebody join the Army if they weren't psychopathic killers or whatever? It's because the system worked for us, and we were like, hey, that's pretty cool. I hope it works for everybody. It must work for everybody, right? So guys like me were naively assuming that by defending the status quo, we were defending the mechanisms that brought people prosperity. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't perceive what I had as having come at the cost of other people not having things. I didn't understand that. We
You
talk
didn't
about
know that other people like had tried those types of things. This is the part of the conservative world that I can relate to personally, because as being someone that kind of like didn't really have a lot of success, was kind of like in a poor family, and then made a handful of like took a handful of chances myself, and then just worked really hard. And just by working really hard in jobs, just kind of like right place, right time. I also chose tech. I saw that as a very young, I was like, I don't mind computers. I hate working on like cars. That was the only other thing that seemed interesting, was like mechanical stuff. And realizing like, okay, well, I can do a pretty easy job that like kind of comes naturally, and there's a lot of opportunity. But like just doing that, just being in that sector, kind of like and working pretty like reasonably hard, showing up to work on time, like just the basics of like doing a job got me to success. And I definitely see how that can give you this feeling. And I definitely remember seeing other people who didn't work as hard as me not have success, not get the same opportunities, move jobs, and have worse things happen. And thinking like, oh, well, I can definitely see how it's like you can just by observing, if you only observe the world in front of you, which is what a lot of us do. We don't always have the time to read books and read theory and like go find out what other people who don't live a world in at all like us have to experience. Like that's the part that I absolutely connect to and can see how you get there. My stepfather also very similar, just a guy who just worked very, very hard and hustled, and that allowed him to make a lot of money and take care of other people. And the struggle though is like, how do you, and you kind of talked about this too, like that's kind of what I see is that conservatism, like that worldview does not teach you what systems are. In fact, it teaches you the reverse. It tries to make systems invisible or feel like they are inevitable, required either by God or by, they just exist and we can't do anything about them. Is that kind of how you feel too?
Yeah, I was having a mild argument with my dad a while back, and he says this thing. He has this phrase he says about himself sometimes, and I don't beef him on it, but I should. He says, we grew up poor. When I was growing up, we grew up poor. Nobody ever handed me anything. Everything I have comes from me working really hard. And on the one hand, he's right. They grew up poor. He grew up. His big indignity when he was growing up was that he had to wear hand-me-downs from his younger brother because his younger brother had a growth spurt before him. And so his younger brother got the newer, bigger clothes first. And so he had to wear hand-me-downs from the brother that was a year younger than him. And did it frost? Boy, did that really.
Oh, is he year young? Yeah, you're younger. Yeah, that would be.
So they were always in competition, and his younger brother got bigger faster than him. But anyway, so he had to wear hand-me-downs. They didn't go on vacations. They didn't have luxuries in the house. So he's absolutely right. They grew up poor. He worked extremely hard. He worked he delivered newspapers, he cut lawns, he painted houses, he delivered, drove a delivery truck, he worked in a warehouse, he stocked shelves. I mean, the dude did work his ass off. So like on the one hand, you could say, yeah, absolutely. Guy worked hard. Nobody gave him anything. Yeah, he's absolutely right. On the other hand, people like you and me understand, my grandfather also worked hard digging ditches and saved his pennies and bought property. You know who didn't get to buy property? The black grandfathers who were also working hard and saving their pennies because they were redlined out of being given property loans. They were redlined out of being given business loans. And so my grandfather didn't work any harder than someone's black grandfather. He was simply allowed to get a loan when someone else's black grandfather wasn't. And
the struggle with make better choices is a problem when when good choices are taken away from you.
Right. Yeah. There's a Twitter, I don't know who said it, but they changed my life. Whoever you were, tweeter, you did it. But they had a quote that said, so many people claim that they deserve what they have in life because they made good choices. And the person said, you didn't make good choices. You had good choices. And I think about that all the time. Like, my dad doesn't understand that he didn't make good choices. He had good choices to make. Like, he was afforded choices that other people were not given. And so, yeah, my dad worked his ass off, but so did a bunch of black dads who got hung up in the criminal justice system unfairly, who weren't given loans, who were rejected from jobs. You know what I mean? Like, my dad got jobs that black guys didn't. And it's not to say that my dad isn't smart and didn't work hard. It's not to say that my dad cheated or didn't do anything. You know what I mean? Like, my dad thinks of racism as like this personal failing, and that a racist person makes a racist choice, which causes a racist, outcome. And he has a really hard time understanding that you, me, and everybody around us can be perfectly nice people and participate in a racist system because the system is self-perpetuating and the system is racist and the system has these unfair outcomes, and we can be perfectly nice, valid, virtuous people and still contribute to these bad systems. He just can't see that sometimes, and it's very frustrating.
You talk about that as a cop, how you felt you just had one of your more recent videos is about cops listening to, this is one of the reasons I listen to you, why I think it's, again, I find it so fascinating because it's so much deeper into the thought process of someone that's there. But you talk about how cops can listen to anti-cop music like Rage Against the Machine. And you talked about how you thought of yourself as not a racist cop, right? You're like, I'm not racist. I'm not doing this. Like, well, you said something that I had never thought of, which I found fascinating, which is that for some cops, they just don't listen to the words. Okay, I figured that much. It's a bop. But you mentioned that for some cops, it's almost an act of resistance. It's like them saying they listen to these radical songs and they bump, fuck the police out of their car, which you said you were like playing some of these songs as you would roll up to stops. Holy shit, that's a wild thought. But I can totally, in a different world, I can totally imagine it all, right? Like, it's very realistic, but I just hadn't thought of it. But like, you talk about how for some cops, they hear it and they're like, this doesn't impact me. I hear you saying fuck the police. I listen to it. I love it. It sounds great to me. But you're going back to you thinking about like, you can listen to these things because you're not a racist cop, because racism is individual racist decisions versus a system that is designed to create worse outcomes for specific people, or does because nobody cares to do anything different or whatever, by ambiguity or by intent.
Yeah. It's that was I guess that was like the biggest, talking about like, I don't know, de-radicalization, or, talking yourself back out of toxic viewpoints or whatever. I mean, that was like the big thing I had to learn. And I think part of it is growing up religious and growing up conservative. Both of those things are very like individualistically focused. Like, in religion, it's about your personal, well, in Christianity, at least Western Christianity, your personal relationship with God. Are you honoring God in the things that you do? Are you following the commandments? Are you living a moral life? That's like a you thing. Did I, and you guys that would set an alarm on their watch, the beep every hour. So every hour they would take stock of whether they were honoring God every hour or whatever, like that kind of thing. It was very individual. Like, am I doing things? Is my conduct appropriate? And in conservatism too, it's, work hard, save your money, make good choices, don't have sex out of wedlock. All these are very individual choices. And so like, that was just the big shift for me, was having to see the world as systems and mechanisms and entities that were big and faceless and complicated. And that was the big thing that I had to come to understand, that my parents still don't when I try to talk to them about certain things. Is just like, it doesn't matter what you personally believe. Like, growing up religious, so much of it is like your personal beliefs. Do you believe the right thing? Have you professed the right, mantra or whatever? And so my parents are obsessed with like, and I use my parents as this stand-in for like the average middle class, non-QAnon, non-January 6th conservative. The conservative that's like conservative but not like a dick about it. Like, that's one of the biggest things, is that they're so obsessed with like, well, but I'm not mean, I'm not evil, I do the right things, I'm a moral person. I'm like, we're not talking about that. When I talk about, you know kids going hungry, or mass shootings, or any of these things that we talk about, police violence, it's not about individual conduct, it's not about individual belief, it's about, what does the system incentivize and what does the system preserve? The system incentivizes these racist outcomes and it preserves them.
Well, and even for a conservative, like I grew up, so I was raised by my grandparents, so they're older people, but they were like lifelong, and still are like lifelong Democrats. But a racist thing that I heard like growing up was, I heard things like, "Oh, we don't have a problem with black people. I only have a problem with N-words," right? And that was like a common in a liberal household. That was a thing that I heard and internalized, and to me that meant, interpreting their statements, it was like, well, there's black people who are normal, who are just like you and me, my friends, and like all the kids I go to school with and stuff. And then there's these other people who are different in some way. And now that I'm older, I realize, oh, it's you're dehumanizing those people. You're taking people who it's basically the same thing as kids with a hoodie on, thug, it's that same concept. But like, that took me a really long time to unlearn that. It took me a really long time to care about the N-word as like a concept, because the very rudimentary public school education I got about racism bad was not sufficient to educating me of the true horrific things that it did, and then drawing the line between that and what it is today. A streamer that everyone hates, but was a very important person as far as me learning to critically think starting in 2016, and like opening my mind up and being like, oh shit, things are fucked and I don't really understand what's going on and I need to go educate myself, was Destiny. And one of the things that he said that I was a mind blown moment was him being like, there are people born today that were born under like Jim Crow laws. Like, how can you be in the same spot? How could I possibly expect someone who's like, how can I say that person had the same opportunities and that their kids have the same opportunities when they weren't allowed to own property or had to use different fucking water fountains? Like that's like an insulting, like realizing that was like an insulting concept. It was a moment where I'm like, oh shit, there's a lot more racism around. And anyway.
Yeah, there's it's so true. It's like, oh, we all start with the same 24 hours in a day. No, the fuck we do not. Some people's 24 hours are pretty impacted by a lot of terrible things that mine.
Some people's 24 hours are in prison.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My 24 hours are a bliss compared to a lot of people's. But yeah, it was back to one of the things you were saying about cops listening to anti-cop music and not thinking that it applies to them. There's an incident that happened in my city one time that I think about frequently. Long story short, we had there was a dispute. Two people were in an argument. Well, I should say a group of people were in an argument with another person, and it was looking like it might get physical. And so somebody called the police, and we came out to like keep the peace or whatever. But what it was some skinheads, some neo-Nazi skinheads had rolled into town and were partying in town and were trying to pick a fight with a black guy in town. And they were, if I can read between the lines, they were intentionally trying to antagonize him so that he would throw the first punch so that they could beat the shit out of him. It was my interpretation of what was happening. But anyway, when we showed up, and I worked in a part of town where most of my fellow officers were Hispanic. It was a Hispanic part of town. Most of the cops that worked with us were Hispanic. So I was one of the lone white guys working on the shift at that time. Well, when I showed up on this call, all the skinheads turned and looked at me and smiled.
Oh,
and we're like, and I saw them relax when they saw me because they're like, oh, good. It's a white
Same
cop.
team.
Yeah,
Same
exactly. And I remember being so skeeved out. And I remember they were trying to, I don't know how to say this other than to just say, they were trying to dog whistle me, if that makes any sense. They were trying to use phrases about the black guy that they were in an argument with that other racists would sort of pick up on. I don't know how to explain it other than just say they were using lingo. I knew they were trying to feel me out.
Was there something specific they said that you were like?
Well, what they kept saying
that you
was
recall?
They kept referring to him being, being threatening to them.
Mm.
And they kept turning to me and saying, this guy knows what time it is. That's what they kept saying about me to the black guy, to the Hispanic officers that showed up. They would be talking about like, well, I just didn't like his attitude. I thought he was threatening me. And then he would turn and look at me and they go, this guy knows what time it is. And they kept saying it over and over. This guy knows what time it is. And I was like, do they think I'm a fucking skinhead like them? I'm not like them. I was so like scandalized that these neo-Nazis thought that I would be racist to a black guy just because it was a white guy versus a black guy in a police
Because
incident.
you're a white cop and you show up.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
And so I ended up, it ended up not being long story short, it ended up not rising to the level of criminality. I ended up hanging out with the black guy for like 30 minutes because I saw them lurking around in their cars looking to start trouble again as soon as we left. So I ended up like hanging out with this dude and keeping an eye on the, just being very visibly hanging out with him until they left and got bored and did something else. So, but I tell that story to say, I think of that story and I think, well, yeah, I wasn't a racist cop. I protected that black guy from those skinheads. What a
yeah.
officer of the year, and so that and so that's why I could say, a lot of cops can listen to Rage Against the Machine, KRS-One, and all these like kind of lefty bands and think, well, hell yeah, being a racist cop is bad. That's why I'm not a racist cop.
Yeah, or
You
even
know,
like you can be enforcing drug laws that are like all like you're in the same community, the same minority communities or whatever, and it can just not hit that's oh I'm kind of doing a racism here by just kind of enforcing all this dumb stuff while still having situations. And I'll tell you a small story, which is honestly what was one of the reasons I wanted to reach out to you a lot was that so there's a lot of trans people in my community. There's a trans person I met a while back that was a cop in Texas and had a situation happen where they really liked their sheriff. They thought it was a really positive experience for them. But then they described that what led them to leave is that they actually had a traffic stop with an intoxicated person they knew from high school, and eventually that person ended up like something happened going for their glove box or whatever, made her uncomfortable, and she shot him. And it was like this really formative experience of like, oh wow, I was a good cop, but something bad happened. And then she eventually left that force. Fast forward years later, she's in my area and she's like, I'm gonna become a cop again. And that's an extreme that is a very confusing that was a very confusing thing for me and the other people in my community. And in engaging with her a lot, it was realizing like you can't like trying to get out of that, right? Is that so much of what she felt like was the draw and what was important is that I'm going to be a good cop. I just want to help people. I want to help. She describes this interaction she has with a homeless person as just another random person and helping them up. And it's like, yeah, I mean, you can do positive things, but the idea that you can do a lot more positive as not a cop, and you can help that homeless person without having a gun, and like you don't have to enforce the laws still too. But like that's I could just tell there was like cognitive dissonance there that was like I never got to like why the ultimate why, other than like to be honest, it felt to me like it was one of the few situations where she would feel like she had power, and that by having the gun and the force, she's a good person, so she's not going to take advantage of it, but it gives her that authority and that power that is just totally missing in her life. And you talk about that a bit in that's a thing that you see a lot in other conservative men. Like you see them when they're talking about anti-trans, they're talking about trans women in women's sports, or they're talking about, whatever the conservative dog whistle or issue of the day. You say that you see a lot of insecurity there and lack of power. Can you talk about that a bit? Like where does that come from? And yeah.
yeah, and just even putting a pin in that for just a second, thinking about your trans friend that would have a negative incident, is part of the trans community, so definitely is up to date on ACAB culture or whatever, and still wants to get back in. Like, I just want to say, like, I totally understand that. Like, I totally get it, because so much of what I'm trying to do now, like in my personal life, is to help people. And like, I volunteer. I do some things in the community here in Minneapolis and stuff like that now, and um, I like helping people. And when you are a cop, you have a lot of access to people in crisis. And even now that my whole brand, like if I ever became a cop again, like I gotta shut my YouTube down. Like I'm finished. If anybody ever finds out. But beyond that, like I think sometimes like I remember these incidents where I had access to somebody in crisis at an inflection point in their life. And I thought, man, if I could do it all over again, I could help this person. I could break this the right way, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, so I totally understand having access to that. It's power and it's access and it's a a seat at the table isn't the right metaphor. It's a different metaphor, but like you have a ticket to the show. And like I totally understand that, like being somebody that wants to help people, being somebody that wants to intervene in a traumatic situation, there ain't no better job in the world than cop, because you are the first person there most of the time for a traumatic situation, right? Like, and so I totally get that. Um, and
That's an
yeah,
interesting way to think of it. I never. You are going to see a lot of people in crisis, and you can put them in touch with counselors. You can put them in touch with 12-step programs. You can
yeah,
force them into these things effectively.
and that's my whole thing about law enforcement, particularly when I'm talking to people that like cops. Or, my brother's a cop, my aunt's a cop, my best friend's a cop, my dad was a cop. Like they're not all as bad as you're saying. I know that. I worked with great cops. There was times I was a good cop. Like there were times where I went out to people in crisis and I chose mercy. There were times when I went out to people that I chose to de-escalate when I could have chosen violence. There were times where I chose grace over cruelty to people, and that's times I'm proud of myself. There was a lot of times I didn't make that choice. There was a lot of times I chose cruelty over grace. And so like my whole deal is like I don't love that there's a system that relies on my attitude waking up on a given Thursday for whether or not you are going to experience state violence, right?
Yeah,
Like I don't love
yeah.
that.
Yeah,
Like
the people that are like, when my cop situation happened, that people were like, he didn't give you a ticket. You should be thankful for that. Fuck you. I
yeah,
don't want
right.
any system that is
Yeah.
in like it's just like you said. It's like it's up to just a random person in front of me and like how they fucking feel, and I don't know anything about that person other than the fact that I do not trust how police are hired or trained or what they are trained. Are you fucking kidding me?
Yeah.
No, that's terrible.
Yeah,
But
the
anyway, yeah, but
yeah, the
you talk
difference.
about a good cop. I do want to talk about good cops because you talked about one who educated you and humanized that migrant community that you were in specifically. And I wanted to know how, like, what is your definition of a good cop, and how many cops are good cops?
Well,
Because
geez.
this is what I mean, this is you are getting to a core of a conservative argument. It's like, well, yeah, people are doing bad things. That's the minority. That's just what you see. That's just what's broadcast. All these things are invisibly happening that are great from these great people.
Yeah. It's so I'll tell I'll tell two stories and we'll go from there. In brief, the first one is the story that you're referring to, which is um, I referenced in a recent video that I had I had arrested somebody for whatever reason. I had looked up their history, and they had, like I mentioned, I worked in an area that was 2.4 square miles, pretty small chunk of the world, pretty small chunk of Los Angeles. And this person had moved from this street to that street to this street to that street, all in the same area, all in the same neighborhood. They didn't leave the neighborhood. And I didn't understand that. And I was like, because the neighborhood was trash, in my opinion, right? Like it's economically depressed. There's nothing to do. It's all, you know, retail and
Strip malls.
factories and dirty streets, and it's polluted and it's full of litter. Why the heck wouldn't you move away if you had the chance? And so my buddy, who was a Hispanic officer and who had grown up in the area, said, well, you don't understand. A lot of these people that live here are immigrants. They came from Mexico or Honduras or El Salvador, Guatemala. They they traveled a very long distance and they set up a home here in this neighborhood. However they ended up here, they ended up here. And this is their new home, and they don't have a home anymore except for this one. And if you didn't have a home and you had finally made put down roots somewhere, wouldn't you stay? Like, don't you understand like what it's like to not have a home? And I realized I didn't understand what it was like not to have a home, right? Like I did not understand the migrant experience, and so that really I didn't understand why a migrant would take pride in a city that I considered trash, which has its own racial and class issues on its own. But I didn't understand why a migrant would take pride in a city that I didn't consider desirable, because I didn't understand the migrant experience. I didn't understand what it was like to give up your home and to put down roots in a new place. And so that really changed my perspective, and it changed the grace I was willing to show people. It changed the mercy and the, I don't know, the empathy I was willing to extend to people. I mean, that really had a huge impact on me. And so I say that story, and I say, well, that officer that kind of recalibrated me, was that a good cop? Well, put a pin in that. My second story, different cop, different night, different life, whatever. I ended up getting into a fight in a little burger shack, a little 5 tabletop burger shack. Ended up getting into a fight with a drunk guy. You just get into stupid fights when you're a cop, especially working weekend graveyards, which was my favorite shift. So ended up beating this dude up. He's drunk. He's not cooperative. Didn't want to leave. He was panhandling. Didn't want to leave. He was drunk. Got in a fight. Didn't want to cooperate. Took him to jail, and I'm taking him solely as a drunk in public misdemeanor mischief kind of thing, right? Like, hey, we got no fight, no big deal. I didn't get injured. He didn't get injured. He's a drunk. He's an idiot. Like, just throw him in the drunk tank. Let him cool off or whatever. So I'm just, I'm just treating this like a little bit of Saturday Night Mischief. He's gonna get a $50 ticket. We're gonna send him on his way. Well, as you know, police officers don't like people that assault other police officers. And I had our gang unit happened to be working that night, overheard that I was in a fight, and one of the gang officers decided to come up and assist me. And he wanted to help me out. And so, as he was patting down this drunk guy, he found methamphetamine on this guy. And I had patted this guy down. I've searched guys before. I know how to do it. I didn't find that on him. And I said, "Hey, are you sure?" Because I already searched this guy and I didn't find that. And he looked me dead in the eye and he said, "Yeah, I'm sure. I found this on him. And don't forget, I'm a drug recognition expert, so I'm a certification in drug abuse recognition. And I've determined that this guy's under the influence of both alcohol and methamphetamine, and that's why he fought you. And yeah, I found that on him." And he dangled. I don't know if you're going to have this video up or if this is just for your private viewing pleasure, but
I will if you want it. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't care. I wore this cool shirt and everything.
If that's how y'all give you up sodomy.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a great one. Send me the link to that after this, but please continue your story.
Sorry. Anyway, so he turned to the guy and he like, he did the little dangle the baggie move that you've probably seen in movies or whatever. He did a little dangle the baggie, and I watched this guy's face fall. I guess you would say. I I don't know how to explain. Like, I've been involved in a lot of traumatic things in law enforcement, And so this sounds like it wouldn't be one of those things. But what I did was I watched this guy understand and then accept that he was fucked, that he was being fucked, that he was. I watched this guy understand and come to grips with the fact that an injustice was going to be done to him and there was nothing he could do about it. You know what I mean? I don't know how to
Yeah,
explain it
because
to
the
you
cop's
other than
word is
just
everything. Because it takes nothing to do
right.
that. In the same way that a cop can simply say, I didn't see your tail light or whatever, it looked out to me, or you were driving in a funny way that looked like you can just make up what do they call it? Fucking
Probable
PC or
cause. Yeah,
whatever.
probable cause. Yeah.
Probable, yeah, exactly.
And well, and so like I'd arrested 100 people who would swear that they didn't commit that crime, and they had, right? Like I've arrested 1 million people who wanted to convince me that they weren't guilty. They obviously had. This guy, you know what I mean? Like I know the difference between a guy trying to get out of something and a guy who's being railroaded. And like I watched this guy's face, and like I just knew, like this gang officer is lying, right? Like I knew in my heart of hearts he planted this meth on this guy. I couldn't prove it, right? Like there was nothing I could do.
Yeah.
Like and I went to there was several other officers on scene that were all part of this caper. And so anyway, the gang guy, our gang officer, understood that I was getting um antsy about it. Like he could tell that I wasn't comfortable. And he said, "Hey, tell you what, let me do you a favor. I'm going to handle all the paperwork on this. I'm just going to go ahead and take this guy. Don't even worry about it. I got this covered. Don't even worry. I got you, baby." And he took off. You know, and so I turned to, and I distinctly remember there was probably 5 other guys on scene for this thing, and I said, "Hey, are we okay with this?" And they all kind of looked at me, and I said, "Hey, are we okay with this? I searched that guy and I didn't find any meth on him. And now all of a sudden there's meth on him. Are we okay with that? Are we going with that?" And everybody turned and looked at each other and they said, "Well, I didn't see anything." "Well, I don't know. I didn't see. I was looking the other way. I was turned around. I was on my phone." Everybody just went, "I don't know." And I said, "Okay, I don't know either." So was I a good cop is my question. Bringing it back around. Was I a good cop?
Well, this is where the ACAB would come in, right? Because I mean, but what so many people, I think, just to draw it out, just to draw out what I can imagine, right? I can imagine a series of people there in the same way you are, where you're like uncomfortable, right? But you've already said something multiple times. You have tried to turn this in the right way, but the person above you, the person with more authority, the person who is just simply taking control of the situation says, I don't care. That's fine. You're uncomfortable. I'm going to go do it because I want to. And all the other officers are like, probably way less in the same way that you were probably the first one there. You showed up, you had the interaction. Everyone else just kind of got there after.
Yeah.
They didn't talk to the guy. They didn't see it. Like it's very easy for them to not care as much about what happened versus you who saw the whole thing, interacted the whole thing, and then tried to stop it and looked and said, I would really like support right now in the correct thing. And everyone around you knows, cops know, what are they going to do? Are they going to are you going to make a problem for this? Like, is that what you're going to do? Are you going to go to the court hearing that this guy's going to be at? That guy's going to be like, yep, I saw it. And he's going to write all the paperwork. And then are you going to show up and be like, actually, I didn't. And I disagree. Like, that's just not going to happen. You're going to move on the next thing. Exactly. Yeah. And that's like, that is the ACAB system, right? That is what people are talking about is the way that a good cop is extremely limited in power because each individual person you're powerful in a moment, right? In single interactions, you talk about in the police hearing the music and stuff, the one about the song, you talk about how a guy was talking shit to you and you were like, hold on there. Stand up for a second. And he stands up And you're like, okay. And you tell them to sit down. And you're just calling the authority that you have to make people do things in small situations. But you are powerless when it comes to the actual reality of policing and these larger situations where other people can just make decisions that it's like, how do you do that? Like, do you file a complaint? Where does it go? Does it go to the same place that my complaints go to? Because those feel like they go in the fucking trash and nobody listens to them. So why would they listen to you?
Yeah. Yeah, there was yeah, I mean, I hate to keep bringing it back to, let's call them war stories. I hate to keep bringing it back to war stories, but I remember one time when I was a rookie cop, so I was on probation, which, long story short, when you get hired as a cop, your first year, typically you're on probation, which means they can fire you for any reason. But then once you pass your probation, it's
You're
like
in the guild and you're like really
impossible
hard
to
to fire
you.
Yeah.
So anyway, when you're on probation, you do whatever anybody asks. You don't make waves. When you're on probation, you just go with the flow. There one time, there was a guy who led us on a police pursuit. Some officers were injured on the pursuit. That person was apprehended, and when he was brought back into the station for questioning, as the rookie officer, I was supposed to be the one fingerprinting and doing all the paperwork because nobody else wants to do the paperwork.
Because you can't complain.
Right. Because there's nothing you could say as a rookie cop. Well, anyway, they had this guy down here who was talking a lot of shit to the other cops. And my sergeant, so not just a fellow officer, not just a senior officer, but the guy in charge of the shift said, hey, Phil, have you made coffee yet? And I said, yeah, I actually already made coffee. There's a fresh pot up there. And then he turned and looked at me and he said, hey, asshole, go make the coffee again, you fucking idiot. And and he gave me this look, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna go make coffee. I'll be right back. And when I got back, that guy had to be transported to the hospital because he had attacked a fellow officer in the jail while I was gone.
Oh my God.
If you can, I know, like, I can't believe he would have done such a thing.
He seems like such a stable person.
But like, obviously I knew what they were doing, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, hey, go somewhere else and don't be here for this. Like,
oh, I see. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. Sorry, I actually didn't catch that. Now I get where you're at. Okay, gotcha. Yeah.
So,
wow.
Right. So, what was I supposed to do as the rookie cop? Where my sergeant, the guy who ran the shift, was the one who was running the cover up of assaulting this guy and hospitalizing him for the crime of contempt of cop. What was I supposed to, like?
Well, well, in all your history, right? Like, you dropped out. Going back to your story, you dropped out of college for this job. You were like, I'm gonna do this thing. Yeah. Like, what are you gonna? You're gonna like what? Quit and go try to get that back again if it doesn't work. You are in a vulnerable position there, and by the time you've made it through a year, you're kind of culpable. I mean, I kind of feel like maybe you start to feel like you are part of it, like you are in that system, right? A year there is like that's how you become indoctrinated into that thin blue line culture, right? Like, is that kind of how it happens?
Well, yeah, it's I mean, it takes, at least in California, it took a massive amount of work to become a police officer. It took a long time. It cost me $5,000 because I paid my own way. A lot of push-ups, a lot of getting yelled at. You know what I mean? Like, it sucks ass. Like, it's no fun. So you have to work really hard to become a cop. You don't, like, that's why I always tell people, when you're trying to understand why would a good cop not intervene when, like, a George Floyd is being murdered or somebody like that. And like, the thing I can't express to you is, it was such a huge pain in the ass to become a cop. The question is, would I give that up for some guy, some stranger,
some random homeless guy, you know, that was making a problem for you,
a drug addict, a
Yeah.
thug, a gangster, like all these things we put on people to not have to care about them. But like that's the big question. Like it was so painful and expensive and such a hassle and so much work to become a cop. What am I going to give that up for you?
My intuition is that what probably led you to not being a cop was over time all these types of small situations, these points where you're being made uncomfortable, things where you're being kind of extended past your morality or into places where you're like, or as you learn new things and you evolve and grow and it just slowly becomes a thing where you're not comfortable with anymore and you step out. Was it that, or was there kind of major situations or major things that you recall happening that kind of are like, yeah, and these are the things why I decided to leave?
Oh man, wouldn't that be a great story for me if I had this big epiphany and I took a big stand and I did the Norman Rockwell meme of the guy standing up at the meeting,
Yeah.
standing in his truth. Man, wouldn't it,
And everyone's looking at you. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Man, wouldn't that be really impressive? Because that's not my story, unfortunately. Um, I was a cop for almost 10 years. I met a woman online on Twitter, of all places, and we fell in love. And she lived in Minnesota. And she said, "Hey, if you were willing to move to Minnesota, we could, be together." And I said, "Hell yeah." Um, I'm looking to get out of California. California's pretty expensive to live in, and I'm a creature of novelty and adventure. What's the opposite of California? Why, Minnesota, of course. So I moved out to Minnesota to go be with this girl that we were supposed to get married. And then when I got out there, she was like, "Hey, I actually don't feel a connection with you anymore, but good luck to you now that you've quit your job." Um, and so that kicked off a pretty low point in my life.
I can imagine.
um,
Jesus.
but yeah,
How
so
long? How long between moving to that happen to her being like, I'm not interested anymore?
6 months.
Ooh. Just enough
Um,
time for you to move all your shit there,
oh yeah,
start to get settled.
oh
Yeah.
yeah. No, it was irreversible at that point. I mean, well, and that just for pride's purposes. Like I'm not crawling back.
Did you
Um,
transfer as a cop or
no,
okay.
no. I tried to apply to some jobs, but Minnesota really likes college degrees, and California doesn't care. And so I didn't have a college degree at the time. So had all these applications in Minnesota, um, but nothing was popping off. And so I took a job for $13 an hour doing observed urine collections for probationers at a private drug testing facility. So I've seen every probationary dick in the Twin Cities. I'm pretty sure. And it's a cool job. Don't get me
And it's awesome. What a great job
yeah.
that is. Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. I mean, gosh, did I love
Stuff dreams are made of.
yeah. Did I love living in a studio apartment, drowning in debt, going to work looking at dicks all day. Yeah, it just wasn't working out. But anyway, I was trying to become a cop in Minnesota at that time, and I just couldn't get it going because I was lacking a college degree. And so that was when I started calling in some family favors and got out of law enforcement entirely and got into coding and tech and stuff like that. So it wasn't until years after I got out of law enforcement for totally unrelated reasons that I started to question, I guess, things that I had seen and said and done. But it was really the 2020 George Floyd protests where it was, to me as a former officer, that was so unambiguously an unnecessary death. I know that's a shitty way to put it, but just speaking as a
As
former cop,
a cop would say that was an unnecessary.
that we
Yeah.
didn't need to do that. That was no reason for that. That was pure spite. Like I was, I know it's pure spite because I've done it. Let me just put it that way. I've done that, and mine didn't result in a death, and that's why nobody knows my name. And Derek Chauvin, everybody knows his name because he got unlucky. I was just lucky, and like that's one of the hardest things for me to like accept in life is that it's all luck. But yeah, I'm lucky that the people that I did those kinds of arrests to didn't die, and I wasn't the subject of a national protest movement. But watching that, like that was so to me as a former cop, so unambiguously unnecessary, so over the top, so stupid, like just a stupid thing to do. And then to watch what the cops did to the protesters who were completely validly upset about this unnecessary death, this tragic atrocity, this maddening, like this angry atrocity, another one, yet another one. Like they were so right to be mad about that because it was such a pointless death. And then to watch what the cops did to all these protesters, brutalizing them, brutalizing the journalists, brutalizing the legal observers, watching people that had legal observer tag around their neck, and watching cops just beat the shit out of them, like with this like fury, like this.
Lack of remorse or care
Yes,
or
this.
thought about what they're doing or why. Yeah.
Yeah, just this total no hesitation to beat the shit out of a legal observer and somebody with a video camera, and just to think like, well, no, this won't come back on me. Like the lawlessness of it, the unaccountability of it.
How much there was, like how many
Yes,
different examples there were in so many different
yes,
places.
yeah. In Minneapolis and in Los Angeles and in Buffalo, New York, they remember they knocked down that
Yep.
old man, and he started
Yep.
bleeding, and they were just stomping over him.
Cops
And
driving
then
over people in New
yeah,
York City,
yeah,
Seattle, the chop, like the shit I
yes,
saw there. Yeah.
yep, yeah. And so it was coast to coast, 24/7 police depravity. Like I had been a cop. Like I should be the most empathetic to these people that I was seeing. I've been in critical incidents. I've been on riot lines. I've worn riot gear. I've been out at protests, and I had never done anything. I had never seen anything like what I was seeing in 2020. Like it was there's a term that the Supreme Court uses to talk about whether something is torture or not, and they say whether it shocks the conscience. And
Mm.
I don't know how to say it any stronger than just to say, as a former cop, what I saw in 2020 shocked my conscience.
It
And I was
radicalized you. It sounds like what you saw radicalized you in
like
some
a
way. Like,
fucking lightning bolt.
yeah.
And so that's why that got me into police and prison abolition, because I needed an answer. Like, why is this happening? Why are they like this? Like, these used to be my friends. Like, these used to be the guys that I looked up to most in the world, and they are blinding permanently a journalist, an unarmed journalist. They're beating her so bad that she's going to go blind in one eye for the rest of her life. These used to be my friends. Like, how is this happening? Like, I needed an answer, and I mean, there's really only one answer that made a lot of sense to me, which was the, the anti-police movement.
Like the things that people were saying about abolition, about
Yeah,
needing to get rid of it, about reform not being enough was compelling to you as someone who had seen it
yeah,
from the inside.
yeah. Angelo I. Davis, Ruth Wilson Gilmore. Oh shoot, the guy that wrote "Who Do You Protect, Who Do You Serve." But these contemporary writer, I mean, people that are still alive. Yeah, they were writing these things, and they were expressing this skepticism that police as a culture could be reformed or like retrained. And like as they were expressing that skepticism, I was remembering being in police training for I'm doing air quotes in case you don't do the video. Police training. I'm putting big old air quotes on that. Um, because every 6 months, a police officer would choke an autistic person to death because they didn't understand, how to handle people that were having a meltdown, and a cop would overreact, choke a disabled person to death, and then we would have to get special training, doing air quotes again, special training on dealing with people with disabilities. And that special training was a 45-minute DVD that the state sent us that we would have to watch in the mail, and we would play on our phones and dick around and play grab ass the entire time while the video was going. And then the sergeant would hand out a quiz, and he would give us the answers to the quiz, so we would all get a 100%, and then he would submit that back to the state, and that way the state could say, hey, we did all this extra train, all these officers were trained on how to deal with people with disabilities, and that's that on that.
I've done all this with my HR department. This sounds like all my diversity and inclusion training and all my, hey, don't harass women in the workplace training and all the, please just do this. We don't really care. We need you to have the box checked off so that we can say that we did it.
It's pure CYA, pure cover your ass training.
Yeah.
And so every time a cop murders an unarmed person, you have all these people like, well, we just need to train them better. And I'm like, train them on what?
You said specifically a thing that I connected with, which is that cops are trained to demand respect and only give any once the other person has earned them. And I think that with so many people, it's so like when people argue about like, you got to understand, like cops have a hard job in this, it's like, I have just the feeling of having somebody just treat me so inhumanely, not listen to me in a moment. Again, if you go watch my video, my cop video right now, it's making massive rounds, which it does about every 2 years as some new small shorts creator. It's got like 17 there are millions and millions more views about my cop situation off of my channel, nowhere near my channel. I'm talking like I have like 1% of the views on that video, but it is so dramatic. And one of the things that one of the reporters reached out to me about was like they were asking me like, why do I think that video is so compelling? And I think it's really compelling because you are me. You are in a POV position where you get to experience how cops operate very often, which is that they don't listen. They're not interested in hearing a single fucking word you say. They're interested in demand, demand, demand. You're not complying. More demands. Force the demand, right? Like that lack of caring. How do you what an absurd thought that you're going to be like, okay, well, that's your core problem, or that's your core of where you're at. Now we're going to give you training on how to deal with autistic people or people that don't interact normally, who already have communication problems, who already have issues interacting with people. And you're going to take that and just like, no, this is always going to be a thing. That's why these people are constantly going to be a problem, and you're never going to untrain that. And I think you even told me, you were like, when I was asking about the use of force training and stuff and how seriously people take it, you're just like, what do you mean? They don't care. Yeah, they don't give a fuck, whatever. Yeah, I mean, why would they?
Yeah, and it's, I guess, so one of the, having a kid sort of surfaces things in you that maybe were dormant for a long time. And, having a 5-year-old who sometimes doesn't like to listen to me, has
comply, get on the ground. Anyway.
Well, you laugh, you're not far off. There is this spike of anger. So I've been dealing a lot with like anger and anxiety. That's kind of like my mental health burden that I've been hacking away at bit by bit here and there. And it's only been in the last year, pretty last 6 months, that I'm starting to understand what is happening like in me. And part of it is, when I was a cop, I was trained very directly that gaining compliance is an officer safety issue. That somebody that is being controlled by a police officer is somebody that will not be able to kill you, whereas somebody who is seemingly not being controlled might be trying to kill you. And that might sound like an absurd thing to say, or that might sound like a weird thought to have to hold in your head. But that was a thought or a thing that was kind of trained and reinforced in me over and over and over. And it was reinforced through video, like dash cam footage of officers being killed, um, news stories of officers being killed, all these different things. It was reinforced over and over and over again that if somebody wasn't complying with you, they might be trying to kill you, and you should probably get on that. You know what I mean? And so there's this, this anger that wells up in me when my 5-year-old doesn't want to behave. And I realized recently that part of it is because I have this dumb idea that if somebody isn't cooperating with me, they might be trying to kill me.
Or they have
And
an ulterior motive, right? It's like
yeah,
doing something, yeah, versus just being a 5-year-old who just doesn't
right.
want to do that thing. Yeah,
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 and so like my my waking brain doesn't think my 5-year-old's trying to kill me, but my physiology is tensing up and fermenting and percolating as if I'm in danger. So like my body is telling me that I'm in danger when people don't cooperate with me, which meant one thing when I was a cop, not a good thing, but like, that's one thing when you're a cop. It's quite a different thing when you're cooking in your house or
yeah.
shopping to have your body tell you, "Hey, they're trying to kill you." Like that's not a normal thought to have at the
Yeah,
kitchen
people don't
table.
realize how deep these trainings and these things
Yeah.
go. Like programming, these types of programming and these types of like existing in these environments. Yeah, it becomes a physical response that you have. You are being trained to create a fight or flight scenario in your head so that you take action quickly based on your training, which is training to make you a violent person, and to use violence to force compliance, to retain control, and then now you can bring that is what that will bring down. Now you can feel safety.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, people really underestimate that, and they don't. That is when I'm having conversations with people, like, it is so interesting to see how even just asking questions can trigger that fight or flight response in people. You see, when you ask a question, someone gets really upset, you realize, oh, there's something there, there's something behind all of that is triggering all of that, but it's often just very unclear, and it takes a lot to get to. Okay, I wanted to get to why conservatives are cruel, and I think you connected it with cops, but like really, it's I think it's similar thought processes, similar training, and a lot of it is don't think in systems, only think in individual actions. Right? Good people make good decisions, bad people make bad decisions. It's really simple. Um, Conservative stories are much simpler to tell. They're very simple to tell, but that's because they're built on lies, and they're built on or they're built on historical, like, you're taking people who've already been exploited for long periods of time, people who haven't maybe have been educated in a very specific way and given a very specific worldview. And if you do all of that, the explanation is like, well, yeah, like immigrants cause crime and are dirty, and we need to keep our culture, whatever, like we're good Americans and they can't be brought in, and whatever. I don't know. It's really hard, I think, for people to overcome that. It's very frustrating, I think, for some people who are on the left who experience people describing and repeating a lot of these simple stories that are not really based in reality, and to be able to come to them in a calm way and question them through that in order for them to build self-discovery, because that a lot of what you describe sounds like self-discovery that happened over time, over seeing terrible things that radicalized you, that made you rethink things, or just subtle interactions with people. Do you agree? Is that the best way, do you think, to like deprogram people who are kind of in that world? Do you agree that, like, with my framing about that, a lot of conservative worldview and stories are simpler, and so that makes it kind of a challenge to overcome that?
Yeah, so one book I always recommend to people, and it's funny, I recommended this to people a lot when I was a cop, but I think I would also recommend it a lot to people on the left. And it's How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's a phenomenal book.
I just recommended that book to a bunch of people in my Discord for the exact same reason.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know, and yeah, it's a book about how to be a good salesperson, but I mean, the dude really understood people and how people work and think and feel, and
The book's
wanted to
about
bring it.
empathy more than
Yeah,
anything. It's about
it's
learning about other people and
yeah,
their desires so that you can frame things in a way that is more persuasive. Yeah.
exactly. So one of the chapters in how to win friends and influence people is about how to persuade people, and he makes the case that one of the best ways to persuade somebody to your way of thinking is to have them believe that they came to that idea themselves. um you know, and it's intuitive, right? Like, you would intuitively think that, like, yeah, if you arrive at something through your own reasoning, that will be more persuasive than hearing somebody else make an argument to you. But to your point, I think, speaking as a former conservative, a former Christian, a former cop, all of these things are very cult like in their own ways. Police work, very particularly, is very cult like. um any cult sort of deprogrammer will tell you, you cannot shame someone out of a cult, you cannot flame them out of a cult through like calculated,
Dunks.
right, yeah, you can't dunk someone out of a cult. um you can't, you are probably not going to reason somebody out of a cult, because people don't get attached to cults for reasonable reasons, right? Like, and we're all susceptible to that. We all operate with some level of unreasonableness, and so the sorts of things that get people radicalized into cults and extremist movements, chances are you personally are not going to give them the 5 point argument that's going to completely dismantle their worldview, because our brains are built to not have their worldviews dismantled, right? Like, our brains are built to pivot and shift, and, oh, actually what I meant was, we're adaptable, right? And so I think it's really, really hard to take a conservative and flip them liberal. Like, you probably personally aren't going to do that, but you might be able to plant seeds that will let them do that for themselves. And I think it's both seeds of, like, I don't know what you would call it, wisdom. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's both seeds of things that are like facts and historical. Like, well, like, the fact of redlining might be a seed that is planted in somebody that makes them sort of less enamored of landlords or whatever. Like, just the concept of redlining might, like, oh wow, I never thought of it that way, that's interesting. Like, that might plant a seed. But I think also relationships are a much more powerful seed, because for me it was, befriending people that were gay helped me understand that the conservative talk radio idea of the gay agenda was perhaps hyperbolic, perhaps not quite in line with reality. Meeting friends that were trans helped me understand, like, it's not like this secret cabal of schemers who are trying to, like, trick you. It's people that just want to pee sometimes at the mall. Like, it's not a big deal. Yeah, it's like, for me, making these relationships with people was a big seed that, like, blossomed into the self-discovery that you talked about. But I think part of it also is just being curious, and I think conservatism. You talked about conservatism telling simple stories. I would say conservatives tell incurious stories. They
Mm-hmm.
tell stories. You said simple. I would say easy.
Mm.
They tell stories that are easy to swallow, that are
Not super, I feel like don't require a lot of like, well, okay, well, you need to know this big thing and you need to know this giant thing.
yeah,
Uh,
they're like self-explanatory. Like, there's these self-explanatory
Intuitive. They
little,
feel
yes,
intuitive.
yes.
Yeah.
And so, you know, and it isn't, it's intuitive to think like, you know, you're walking down the street and you see somebody who's unhoused with a 40-ounce bottle in their hand, and you think, ah, there we go. I understand. This person is homeless because they are an alcoholic. And they're an alcoholic because they lack the moral fortitude to not be addicted to alcohol. Ergo, this milieu that I'm seeing in front of me on the city street is normal and acceptable. And I don't have to give it any more thought while I'm on my way to Trader Joe's or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, so we like that simple story because then our brain doesn't have to think about it. And so I remember, I remember one time I was arguing with somebody and I was like, we don't give a homeless person money. They're just going to use it on booze. And the person said, hey, well, what if that person's an alcoholic and having a shot of vodka is the only thing that's going to steady their nerves long enough to go take a job interview so that they can start making some money and get a house? And I thought, fuck, I never. And not that that's even, whether or not that's even plausible or reasonable or whatever, like forget the scenario in and of itself. Just the idea that somebody came up with a theory
That was plausible
that
as an alternative to
humanized,
just simply being a person who made bad choices.
yeah, and that like fully rounded out this person who I had this kind of flat image of. I was just like, fuck, you're right. Maybe that I don't have all the information I need, right? Like I think that's the biggest difference between conservatives and we'll just say not conservatives is when I was a conservative, I was pretty sure I knew everything I needed to know right then and there. And that, oh yeah, sure, you could read some books and learn Moby Dick or whatever. But like, as a conservative, you think every as a conservative, we hold these truths to be self-evident, right? Like that's the big line from the you know, the Declaration of Independence or whatever. And so as a conservative, I was pretty sure I knew everything. And now, as a non-conservative, I'm extremely confident that I know very little. and and so when I was a conservative, I would hear something that I didn't understand, and I would take not understanding it as hostility because the world is self-evident. So if you're not self-evident, you're trying to fuck with me. Now, being more on the left, I hear something that I don't understand and I think, huh, I've never heard of that before. I should learn more about that. I should investigate. I should ask questions. And so,
That
and
feels like such an intuitive, like that is what does change, is that people become, you become more curious. And yeah, like you have to leave the world of like knowing how the world works because you've inserted God or other things that just like explain every like large complicated things instead of systems which are challenging to understand. You have to understand all the mechanisms, you have to understand more history. You've made it simpler, and you have to leave that world and you have to enter this world of like, actually, we really don't know almost anything about the human brain. And if you're talking about IQ scores and shit, you're in a world of like where you don't, you're making so many assumptions about how things operate. Like it's just not an educational, intelligent thing to do. And I think that is why what I think is so interesting about people when they become more progressive, they often become more curious about the world and other things, but they leave behind the curiosity for their fellow man that is struggling to get there. And that is what I find to be deeply frustrating because I have so many friends. And one of the things that I somehow intuitively did in my life growing up was I was often a gel between very different people that I got along with all a bunch because I had a lot of variety of different interests. But like, yeah, like that. And that is why in my community, like, and again, part of like trying to educate myself is trying to bring that. I want my community to try to be a soft landing place for people with more conservative views because because my community is so queer and so progressive. All the people that they need, the things that would actually change people's, because yeah, meeting a trans person was a very formative moment for me as far as like learning. It led me to a whole series of self-discoveries, but it was a slow process of interacting with that person over months, or years. And if you enter my community as somebody who doesn't fully align in every way, like you just, there's not a lot of curiosity for how you got there. And there's a lot of interest in being mad at you that you had the audacity to come into the space and say these things. And there's not a lot of interest in like persuading you and like learning about you and bringing you over. And yeah, that's hard. I don't understand that part of, I mean, I do understand that part of progressivism, which is that so many of these people have been fucked with. They are trans people. They are queer people. They are people with not a lot of power in their lives who have been exposed to abusive relationships and bad parenting and all these terrible things. I get that that is probably mostly the reason. I just don't really know how to fix it.
Yeah, no, I totally get it too. Like, I think if I had to put it, what I don't know how to like incept into people, and it's the thing that like I try to do with my channel, and I try to do with my online presence, and I try to do with how I communicate just in my day-to-day life. But like I don't know how to do it. It just happens sometimes, and it happened to me randomly, and I don't know how to do it to others randomly. It's just, I want you to ask more questions. I want you to, why? Why do you think that? Why do you feel? I want you to ask that of other people. Why did he say that? Why did she say that? Why does she think that? I want you to meet somebody that says, I use its pronouns, and I want you to say, huh, I would have thought that would be dehumanizing, but you want me to do that. I'm very curious to know more. You know what I mean? Like, I want you to like not just ask more questions. I want you to delight in asking more questions. I want you to be like energized by asking more questions. And
I want you to be genuinely interested in other
yes.
people and that is in how to win friends and influence
Yes.
people specifically. Yes.
Yeah. And so it's really hard because, and it's really hard because talking about your community, like a community of queer people, progressive people, people who have been hurt, people who have been traumatized, people who have been abused, stepped over, stepped on, people who have been dehumanized. Like, to ask them to be more interested in their abuser, I understand is a shitty thing to do. Right? Like, I recognize what I'm saying in that context is absurd and, irritating. Like, I get that. And I don't know how to thread that needle, and I'm not going to. I'm going to take the chicken shit way out and say, well, I don't know how to thread that needle, and I'm not going to. All I can say is, I guess I would say it like this. It is not all of our calling. It is not all of our calling to be a soft landing for people who are trying to maybe dip their toe into progressivism. Not all of us are called to be the welcoming committee for the fresh off the boat conservative who just had a fucking jump scare with reality, with medical bills, and went, oh my God, now what? Not all of us are called to do that. And if that's not your calling, there's no shame in that. And there's no,
you're not lesser for not being able to have that, for not having that skill set or that internal desire necessarily.
Yeah, that's not a moral failing for you to be like, hey, I'm not in a place right now where I'm feeling really charitable to former conservatives, because there's other of us that can do that. I can do that. That's what I do, right? Like, so if that's not your deal, great, tag me in. Like, that's what I'm here for, because that doesn't bother me, right? Like, I am not bothered. I have religious trauma. I have a really hard time being in churches sometimes, like, just physically, I have a hard time with it. But it is not a trigger for me to talk to religious people and navigate that. So, I will do that. You don't have to. I just think it's worthwhile to do. Like, someone should do it, right? Like, somebody.
That makes a lot of sense, and that that is kind of what I started to try to do, was basically to take point more in conversations with people that felt difficult and asking people to tag me. And that's a really good, because again, it was identifying that there are many people in my community who, on top of being queer or trans or whatever, are also autistic or neurotypical in some other way, which I am too. I have ADHD. I might even have more than that. I'm still talking to doctors about it. But the reality is like these people don't frustrate me the same way that people who are different in that way find that interacting. I think it's like this thing where it's the ability to take people's words seriously, but not literally, right? Like to be able to hear them, to have it hit you, and then not really like not have it go into the centers of my brain that just make me angry, right? It's just like, okay, why do you feel that way? And then having that energy. But that does require a lot of effort. And there are definitely people who are not there. And yeah, I think that in that is probably a good piece of feedback and a good piece of advice is to say, hey, if you want more people to come in, but you don't really want to be the one to educate them, right? You're more in the Google is free type response, right? What I need you to do is hit me or hit someone else. Don't do that. Don't do the thing where you push people out of the community because you are feeling. I think to an extent there's a protectiveness to it, which I believe is natural, right? You find a place where you feel safe. Finally, you find people that you feel like you can talk to about things that are, and you see someone come in and you feel like it's a threat, but realizing that this is Discord. This is not the random person walking in from Discord has no power over you. Hit the mute button if it's that frustrating to you and ping me, right? Like this person cannot control you farther than that if you do not allow it. But so many people, I feel like they hear things and the words that hit them control them. They don't have the skill set to like let it go.
Yeah, I've intimated at some point when I feel like really just really nuking my audience personally. I'm gonna do a video about like, hey, sometimes you can just let it go. Like sometimes you don't have to say anything. But there's more to it than that. But yeah, I feel it. But like I guess yeah, I think for me, from my perspective, like it's tough because I get comments sometimes on my videos, very rarely, but not single digits, of people who say something like, yeah, well, you talk a good game, but you participated in all these terrible things. Ergo, I'm never going to trust you. I'm never going to like you. And I'm never going to give you the benefit of the doubt. So I think you're just doing this for clout. I think
or your own guilt or something.
yeah, you're trying to make yourself feel better.
Yeah.
I'm never going to give you the benefit of the doubt. And they'll say things like that. And those aren't fun comments to get. I don't love doing that, but I understand it. You know what I mean? Like I understand if the law enforcement apparatus ruined your family, I understand that you may not have a lot of love for like reformed cops who are like, but I'm good now. I read Angela Davis, I'm good. I read Audre Lorde, I'm good. Like I get that may not be sufficient for you. Like I don't hold any ill will towards that, right? You know what I mean? Like I don't have any beef towards anybody that's like, hey, I don't care that you claim you're reformed, I'll never trust you. Okay, don't. I'm not asking for state secrets, right? Like I've never asked. Don't invite. I've told people, don't invite me to the planning meeting for the protest. Don't include me on the group chat for the thing. Like, you know what I mean? It's not gonna hurt my feelings, right? Like, I'm not asking you to give me the keys to the kingdom or anything like that. All I ask is that you be open to maybe learning something from somebody that you don't respect. And
That's very essentializing though to do to somebody, right? Isn't that the thing that on the left, like you're not supposed to do? You're not supposed to say you did a bad thing, therefore you are always a bad person. We are supposed to be the people that understand that we all come up from a diverse background and everybody has a different journey in life, and nobody cannot change. Everyone is different. The person you are tomorrow is not the same person that you're going to be today as the environment and different things hit you. And that's what I get the trauma from it, but that I find to be just deeply frustrating because it feels like the thing that everybody is already saying we're not supposed to do. All Black people aren't fucking poor or aren't doing crime. Being Black doesn't make you more criminal. That is essentializing. Why are we doing that to anybody else? Like potential people who are maybe just a fraction away from like being all the way on our side for a lot of things, who will vote in the same way that we will. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I know what you mean.
I do get it. I
I
do
get it
get
on
it.
yeah. I get it on either side. When I think about like like the left, the leftist community, the broad online left or whatever, it's whatever, and everybody draws their boundaries in different places. One of my fuzziest boundaries is like this frustration that I have where a bad deed becomes a bad soul
Person.
or whatever, you know. But on the other hand, so many of these communities have experienced somebody committing a bad deed who never undergoes any accountability and then goes on to have, wild success. You know what I mean? Like so many of these people have seen their abusers go on to just achieve success and fame and clout. And
Or
it's
lie or like do an
yes.
apology that is
Yeah.
insincere and then turn around and do it again or something. Yeah,
And it's
totally.
super frustrating. And so like I totally understand people that are just like, I am not emotionally participating in that. But yeah, but yes, to your point, I think to to the extent that I would make any proclamation from my point of view, it would just be it is worthwhile for somebody to invest in educating people who are sort of halfway kind of there. That might not be your calling, it might not be your passion, and that's fine. I just think it's worthwhile to do, right? Like I
Yeah.
think having an off ramp and just having answers for people asking questions, because the other thing I'll tell you, to bring it back to like my background and my origin story or whatever, one of the biggest challenges that I experienced when I was a Christian in the church growing up was that I was always asking questions. Why is it like that? Who said that? Why did they say that? Why is it like that? Why can't we do that? Like who wrote this? When did they write this? Why did they write this? Oh, it's inspired by God. Really? Well, what about this? Well, what about that? Like I was one of those annoying people that asked lots of questions. And to my dad's credit, he was game, right? Like, and so I was able to grow in Christianity for a long time because people answered my questions. And the time that I left Christianity, the things that took me out of it were times that people were no longer able to answer my questions. And the things that brought me into progressivism and the things that brought me into leftism and the things that brought me into abolitionism where people had good answers. People had satisfying answers, or they had meaty answers to my questions. Like they had answers to my questions that didn't just feel like a thought terminating cliche, like, oh, da 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 da. Don't even worry about it. You know what I mean? Like people didn't have bumper sticker answers for me. They had real answers for me, and answers that invited further discovery. And so I guess what I would just say is like there is value in honing your elevator pitch. There's value in honing your ability to communicate with people that haven't read Judith Butler and that haven't seen Sorry to Bother You. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
there's value in developing a lexicon that will function in communities that are very different from the ones that you're used to. People are yearning for answers. People are yearning to have these questions answered. And I guess what I would say also is like even as a super conservative person, even as a super Christian person, and even as a super coppity cop, there was always like a little bit more that didn't make sense to me, I guess. Or like there was always just like a little crack. There was always like a little question. There was always like this little nagging thing in the back of my head that was like, this isn't, something doesn't seem right. Like the system, when I was a cop, there was all these incidents that would happen with individuals making individual choices, that it would suddenly occur to me that these individuals didn't have resources that they needed, like medical care, mental health care. Like we were not giving them the tools that they would have needed to thrive, and I didn't know how to like square that circle. When I was a Christian, like these ways that I would talk about the poor didn't seem to jive with how I would treat the poor when I voted in the voting booth. I had all these questions. So I guess all I would say is like there is value in thinking about how to communicate with people who are completely at first base, completely at square one, completely do not have your same breadth of knowledge about the world. People are yearning for answers, and you would be surprised at who will hear you if you have a good answer.
I have people email me and they email me directly and they're like, I went to your Discord community. I do not feel safe asking this question there because I feel like people are going to yell at me. And you talk about how like even discussing with other progressive people, like I am often afraid to frame I feel a requirement to frame things and do so much independent research before I even think about asking a
Yeah.
question because I am not because I am simply afraid that other people will take it will simply like see me say a thing and just go off on that thing. And that has happened before. That has happened with things, topics, and stuff. Like I have reasons to believe that, and yeah, like the big struggle of like how do you even make a space where you can express doubt or uncertainty about something in a safe way where people aren't going to like make you feel shame, aren't going to do the things that do not create change that we know don't. Like you can Google what makes people change their mind. It's the things you said. It's definitely not shame. It's by being vulnerable. It's by being able to be open and honest. It's by not receiving judgment. It's by getting people to sincerely engage with you and answer those questions. Yeah, well, if I get the golden ticket, I'm working. Let me put it this way: I'm fucking working on it. I'm still trying things. I'm rolling the dice and seeing what hit. I'm getting people fucking mad at me and yelling at me, and I'm like, cool. Let me adapt. Let me try something new. Then, okay. And I'm a pretty strong and opinionated person. I've been around a long time. Like I've got a lot of experience in a lot of different things. And yeah, I guess I feel a little bit. I feel a little bit of the white man confidence of like being able to like I'm going to push back a little bit and like let people and I feel fortunate enough that I've earned enough credit with people for doing positive things that they will allow me the opportunity to learn and grow or to push back, which is that's not everybody's going to get that, and so I'm going to try to use it and then turn that into something. But I wanted to ask, I'm going to let you go, but I wanted to ask one question, and I think I kind of already got the answer because you talked about how you met someone really important on Twitter, and I was going to ask you, I hate Twitter. I hate TikTok. I'm trying to get rid of all these social media things because I actually think that that's a big part of the reason why people do not engage well with other people and just look for dunks and look to just shit on other people, even in communities where that's expressly said it's not supposed to be that way. What's it going to take it to get you off Twitter? And who the fuck is Linda Kronstadt? I don't know who that is. This is a deep meme.
Um. So Linda Ronstadt was like was
Oh,
she like a disco? She's 60s or 70s. Linda Ronstadt. I don't know. I don't know. She was like a pop star, like 60s or 70s. And the Kronstadt rebellion was a rebellion in Russia from, I believe, some dock workers and some naval workers. It was a it was an intra communist rebellion. It was basically communists who were
mm.
rebelling against other communists, saying, "Hey, you're being you're being like authoritarian. You have gone astray from communism, and we're protesting you, saying, "Hey, get back on track." And they were, sort of mercilessly repressed. But so, if you're kind of like an anarcho-communist type, I think the Kronstadt Rebellion, maybe you have some esteem for it. So anyway, Linda Kronstadt was just Linda Ronstadt, but with an anarchist meme for
Okay,
you, I
I'm gonna
guess.
look it up. That does sound interesting, so I'm
Yeah.
glad I asked. How are we
Um,
gonna get you off Twitter, buddy? I feel like it's not good. It's
it's not.
you just like engaging. Is that what
I'm
it is?
not having.
You like posting?
No, well, you think, do I like engaging? No, because they have almost every major topic of discourse muted.
Yeah,
Because I'm tired of hearing about it. I don't want to hear what you think about DoorDash. I don't care. I don't care anymore. I don't want to hear what you think about fucking. I don't even know what. I have
I don't
any
like looking at
topic.
the trending. None of the trending
Yes,
is ever
nothing.
good. It's
It's all
all
terrible.
terrible.
So here's the thing. Like, it's a fine question. Sorry, I kicked my mic cord there. I don't know if that made a buzz.
You're good. I
Um,
still hear you.
yeah. But here's the thing. Like, I don't have friends like AFK. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I go out and do things in the community, but I don't like have like a crew of like 5 people that I hang out with every week. So the only people I hang out with are the people that chat with me on Twitter.
Mm.
So that is the extent of my sort of socialization that isn't work related. It's like I chat with people at work. Other than that, if I want to use words that aren't, you know, database related or accounting software related, I have to talk to people online. Or
So
my
it's a community. It's a community. It gives you a place in
yeah,
the community. You need a
or my
different community that fulfills the same needs or something
well
somehow.
that and it feels asynchronous in a way that I like. I've really tried to get Discord. I've really tried Discord. I really have. But like, I don't know, something about this. You know what it is? It's for me. I grew up on AOL chat rooms, and so it just feels like a chat room that's always going, and it's like really hard for me to like plug into it. I don't know how to explain it.
Yeah, I think Discords are like you have to find the right one, and like, I I didn't really find the right one until I made my own, and the one I made took 4 or 5 years to like actually turn into anything other than 3 people.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, I get that. And Twitter is like it's so low access. You can follow people you like that are on YouTube or whatever. You can follow celebrities. I think with the Elon thing, it's just gotten so non-functional for me. And like
Yes.
the amount of just like, I don't feel like I can get news there anymore. That was like, I've been on Twitter since 2009. And
Yeah.
like, I used to follow a lot of journalists there. I used to follow a lot of tech writers there, cybersecurity people. And like,
Oh yeah, you can't.
it's still there, but it's like it feels like I just shouldn't be doing that. It feels like I should be doing different things with my time because I just don't. I feel like engaging with people in that way, it doesn't feel like it creates the change that I'm talking about, and so it feels like I'm just fucking wasting my time. And that's it. But I get the
Yeah.
community part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, if you do Twitter like I do, which is where I have 100,000 people blocked and I probably have 1,000 terms muted. So for me, Twitter is like my little garden. It's my little garden of people who then retweet dipshits into my feed constantly because we just can't we just can't not retweet dipshits, can we?
It's fun.
We
It's
got to keep giving them.
catharsis.
You can't even just do a screenshot. We got to retweet them so they get the engagement. Fuckers.
True.
Anyway, yeah, I don't know. Twitter sucks, but
Do you use any other ones, or is it that your only? Is that like your main? Is that your
I'm on
Instagram?
I'm on Blue Sky, but I don't know.
That's for the real weirdos. That's for you are too plugged in if you are on Blue Sky.
It's good. I mean, Blue Sky is good. It's got good communities over there. It's just I don't know. I think I only have room in my heart for one social media platform, and right now most of my friends are on Twitter, so that's where I'm at.
Yeah. Okay. Well, fair enough.
Yeah, it's garbage. I don't know. It's terrible.
Thank you again for coming. What do you, other than your YouTube channel, which I'll link and of course and post some stuff too. But like, is there anything else you would want people to do? Follow Linda Kronstadt on Twitter, of course.
Yeah, I'm that dang Phil on Twitter, and I don't know if my screen name will be that same one by the time you hear this, but
What's your next video you're making, or a hinting, maybe a hint at if you don't want to talk about the full.
uh, I haven't decided officially, but the one I'm working on right now, the nug I'm working on right now, is the politics of heartbreak.
Hmm.
And I'll just leave you to wonder what I mean by that.
Okay. I'm interested. You've reeled me in successfully. Well, I subscribe, so, and I got the bell on.
There you go. Hit that bell. I don't know what it does, but hit it.
Not
I've never hit it
not
for
a lot.
anybody, but I'm sure it does something.
All right, Phil. Well, thank you for doing this again.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I appreciate the invite. Always happy to chat with you.
Yeah. I'm glad you don't hate me. I'm glad you gave me the chance to rock your conservative world, to ask a couple questions.
Yeah, hey, you're to give advice for men on
Yeah, oh, that was so fun. I'm not gonna lie, I was so excited about that. I'm people are finally asking me to like do drops and stuff for them here and there. These small people, right? But it's so fun. I love doing it. I don't know if do you know who Matriarchetype is? Have you heard of her?
Yeah.
Okay, so did you watch her most recent video?
I haven't seen it yet, no.
Okay, it's really long, so I wouldn't blame you if you didn't. But she asked me to do a George Bush quote, so I got it. I watched a bunch of clips, and I got to do like my hey yeah no. So fun.
Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's what I was gonna say. Because when you invited me, I was like so excited. I was like, "Yay! People don't hate me." Oh, yeah. YouTube for me has been a very insular project, and has been a thing where a lot of people don't seem to want to interact with me at all. They either seem very afraid of me, or just they're just busy doing other shit. And I've got a full-time job, I think, like you. So like this is very much like for fun for me, but. Yeah, I wish I could connect more with people, which is why I started doing this video series, is because I was like, well, here's an excuse I can get people to come talk to me for like 2 hours for. So,
You're in the inner circle, man.
Bless.